The Shadow Crystals. Mysterious shards of darkness that flow like water in the hand and turn to glass in the light world. Inexplicable fragments of shadow granted to us when we defeat bosses of immeasurable strength who generally lay off Deltarune's beaten path. With Chapter 5, we finally come to understand what it is that they are, Sham telling us that shadow crystals manifest from the power of lost dreams. When a strong attachment turns into a dream, and that dream is broken off, this is how shadow crystals are formed. Knowing this, though, a couple of questions come to mind. Why does the knight have a shadow crystal? And where did Pink's come from? To answer these questions, it's important to ask the same of the other secret bosses. There's going to be a lot of guesswork, as only one shadow crystal has a confirmed point of origin, but we'll try to stay within the realm of realistic possibilities. In the case of Jevil, initially he didn't drop a shadow crystal. He was retroactively given one with the release of Chapter 2, and consequently, I don't think his shadow crystal has any real meaning attached to it. At the very least, I don't think Jevil's shadow crystal comes from him or any dreams related to him, as appropriately enough, given his nature as a Joker card, he always seemed playfully indifferent about everything both before and after his descent into madness. Even his actions belay not a desire for any grander plan or circumstance, but solely a desire to stir chaos where he can. In all likelihood, it was probably given to him by the same mysterious stranger who whispered him the truths that drove him mad in the first place. Moving on to everyone's favorite salesman, Spamton's crystal is by far the easiest to explain, and illustrates the broken dream concept most clearly. And to be clear, as I myself have been mixed up on this in the past, the crystal did in fact come from the Neo body, and not Spamton himself, as Sham clearly states that the salesman had found the crystal in the old machine. Having come from within the Neo body, Spamton's shadow crystal was formed from the lost dream of Hapstablook, who, much like an Undertale, desires a corporeal body that better represents who they are and how they feel, a feeling shared between two of the three ghost cousins. But Deltarune is not like Undertale, at least not in terms of setting, and without the technology to make this a reality, Hapstablook eventually gave up on the idea that they would ever have a body that would make them feel comfortable. This led to the generation of the Shadow Crystal, which we receive upon Spamton's defeat. When it comes to Gerson, it's a bit hard to explain the origins of his Shadow Crystal, as I feel there are sound arguments to be made on either side for it being either naturally generated or planted, though I lean towards the latter. In favor of natural generation, there are actually two possibilities, I feel. Gerson's son, Alvin, mentions several times that he worries about not being able to live up to his father's legacy. His sermons are dry, and his self-esteem in this regard is so low that he doesn't even try to scold Chris for falling asleep during the morning service. These feelings of inadequacy, paired with the sensation that even in death he's living in his father's shadow, certainly seem like they'd be more than enough to completely sever him from his dream and create a shadow crystal. However, in Chapter 5, upon reading the note Susie left for him on behalf of Gerson, Alvin's hopefulness and desire to write is renewed. As he was simply worried he would tarnish his father's reputation, I believe he had never truly given up on his dream in the way that Hapstablook had given up on a basically impossible situation. As for Gerson himself, he held the hope in life that his son would pick up the pen after him and write the story that he wished to see. Alvin, of course, never did this while Gerson lived due to his previously mentioned apprehensions. It's possible that shortly before his death, Gerson considered it an impossible dream, forcing him to give up on it and leading to the Shadow Crystal's generation. However, I find its placement in Gerson's desk to be suspicious and appropriate in equal parts. As shadow crystals seem to manifest within the subjects of the lost dreams, it's entirely possible that Alvin, unlikely though I find it he would be the source of the crystal, ascribed enough meaning to his father's primary workplace that the crystal would generate within its drawers. The subject of Gerson's dream is a bit more ambiguous, though. He did hold hopes for Alvin, this is true, but his mentorship of Susie makes it pretty clear that he probably would have been happy if anyone had taken his message to heart, which the people of Hometown and their prophecy-based religion seem all too happy not to do. This makes it nearly impossible to pin down where the Shadow Crystal would have generated if it did come from Gerson. This, combined with Gerson's feeling that somebody wanted him to use the Shadow Crystal, inclines me to believe in his case that it was planted by someone else. And while I have an idea of who that might be, that is a different conversation for a different time. Next, we take a look at the first of our unusual duo, Pink/Mew Mew. At first glance, it's unclear where Pink's Shadow Crystal even came from. The crystal itself was within the Mew Mew Darkner's body, Pink claiming that they'd been in possession of it since they arrived in the Dark World. It being within the body is an important detail, as the only other Shadow Crystal that came from within something was the Neo body. So then whose dream was lost? Frankly, it's a toss-up, as the Mew Mew doll bounced in ownership between, presumably, Alphys, Asgore, and Pink. The Alphys of Deltarune prefers Mew Mew Kissy Cutie 2 and its mature themes over Mew Mew Kissy Cutie 1's moe aesthetics and slice-of-life aspects. She claims that Asgore also prefers MMKC2, and based on the Mew Mew Darkner's mannerisms, I think it's safe to say that she was merchandise for MMKC1. And as such, she wouldn't really be desirable to either Alphys or Asgore. To Alphys, Mew Mew is undesirable, to Asgore, she's unimportant, and to Pink, she was initially nothing more than the means to an end. Of the three, only Pink has any sort of desire attached to Mew Mew, and that desire is fulfilled swiftly and to an extent beyond her wildest dreams. So, if no Lightners had lost a dream related to Mew Mew, must we then assume that it was planted? I don't think so, because I do not think that a Lightner was responsible for the Shadow Crystal, but that it was in fact Mew Mew herself who generated it. Now, initially I operated on the assumption that only the dreams of Lightners could create Shadow Crystals. After all, a Lightner was the source of the only verifiably sourceable Shadow Crystal in the game. And given Mew Mew's incredibly suspicious post-launch patch dialogue, it would be easy to assume that she has association with someone who could have given her the crystal. However, Sham doesn't declare whether it's a Lightner's lost dream or a Darkner's that creates the Shadow Crystal once it's broken, and I personally don't think it makes a difference. If Darkners are being set up to be treated as equals with respect and their own desires, then they can have dreams that are shattered and lost as well. Even Ralze, who once championed the idea that Darkners don't matter, is the first to speak up in defense of Mew Mew and her autonomy during the Pink fight. So, what dream of hers was lost exactly? Well, Mew Mew is a simple girl with simple dreams: to date, to love, to be loved, and to eat sand. Yet nobody was there for her. Asgore describes her as a gift from a sort of friend and claims she's the store's mascot, but he displays her atop a trash can. The irritable ghost, soon to be Pink, grumbles in dissatisfaction at the fact that she's displayed at all, jealous only of the fact that her desired body is being ogled. Within the dark world of Asgore's shop, she has not a single niche carved out for her, and nobody to care about her desires until she is forced to speak up during the fight with Pink. She was well and truly alone, and with a dream that had gone completely ignored. This leads me to believe that it was Mew Mew's own trampled dreams that resulted in the formation of this Shadow Crystal. As an addendum to the idea that Darkners can create Shadow Crystals, I think it important to circle back to Jebel and discuss Sham the Shopkeep. He's a strange existence as far as the Shadow Crystals go, as both a friend to Jebel, who had the opposite reaction to learning the truths of his existence, and as the one to set us on the Shadow Crystal quest in the first place. It's strange to think that he knows about them at all. Stranger still that he seems to know who holds them, and once held an item vital to defeating the strongest of the Shadow Crystal holders. And strangest of all, that he seems to have a purpose for the Shadow Crystals at the end of our quest, one which excites him enough to pull him from his usual apathetic stupor. His goals are unclear, and while it's also unclear how he ended up in the abandoned classroom, we can surmise that at some point he either belonged to or was beloved by one Azrael Dreamer. Azrael has an illustration on his PC which Susie instantly recognizes as Sham after all, and that he was an equal to Jebel implies either that Azrael loved him so deeply that this translated into significant power in the Dark World, a la Flowery and the Six Flowers, or that Azrael wished for him to be a sorcerer without equal, which is just as likely given that Azrael's edgy, hyper-god of death sensibilities run just as strong in Deltarune as they did in Undertale. Either explanation would explain how he was able to muster the strength to match Jevil when Jevil himself was wildly powerful, owing to the general perception of the Joker as a powerful wild card. So then where do the shadow crystals factor in? Well, perhaps Azrael had some dream related to Sham having to do with his dreams of video game design, and perhaps those dreams fell through and Azrael, dejected, gives up, leading to the formation of a shadow crystal within Sham that finds its way to Jevil's hands. But we don't really get any information that Azrael was passionate enough to feel this dejected about anything like this. We don't get much information about Azrael at all, excepting what we learn about from the lens of those he knew or lived with. We don't get a lot of information about Sham either, but we do get enough to make a more solid guess as to the origins of the shadow crystal that Jevil has. Despite Sham's apathy, when questioned on the relationship between Lightners and Darkners, the descriptions he gives imply a deep admiration on his end, a worship even for the Lightners. They give Darkness purpose, and while he'd love to pretend otherwise, it's clear he, like the Spade King, secretly yearns to be given purpose again through interactions with Lightners. However, Sham, unlike the Spade King, knows the secrets Jevil knew, and likely knows that the Dark World is not but a meaningless game, and that even the light world beyond it is part of something less than real. This knowledge is what led him to his apathy, and while it's clear the feelings of admiration he expresses are genuine, he simply cannot bring himself to care. Sham is a being whose knowledge makes him prone to giving in and giving up. The moment you miss a shadow crystal, he accepts the situation as matter of fact, and acts as though he never brought it up in the first place, immediately giving up on whatever plan he had and refusing to acknowledge it, even if you bring him the crystals of later bosses. It is no grand leap to think that his admiration and worship were twisted and broken upon learning whatever grand secrets Jevil shared with him, leading to the death of whatever dreams he held for coexistence with the Lightners, and the formation of the shadow crystal which Jevil bears. Or perhaps it led to more, as after all, concept art of Sham, drawn up to provide a reference for his plushie, portrays him wielding a staff that contains the power of broken dreams. And where would he learn how to wield such power, if not through experiencing it firsthand? All of this to say that I think that if Jevil's shadow crystal were to be naturally generated, it probably would have come from Sham. Lastly, we have the Roaring Knight. This one is going to seem a lot more speculative, given we don't even know who the Knight is at this point, but let's just operate under the assumption for this moment that the Knight is December Holiday. Now, in Chapter 4, when we enter Dessa's room, we can examine objects all around it and find that she enjoyed sports of all kind, played several instruments, most of which lay broken and dented on the floor, and tried her hand at drawing on at least one occasion. This initially paints Des as an ambitious, somewhat irresponsible creative, with a soft spot for the guitar, given it's the only of her instruments that survived without a scratch prior to her disappearance. Or rather, her departure, if Noel's side B dialogue is to be taken literally. However, in Chapter 5, when speaking to Pizza Pants, we learn that Chris, Des, and Azrael were once in a band, and that of the three, Chris was the only one who was able to play their instrument in a way that could be described as pleasant. It's unclear how this sat with Azrael, as there are no instruments in his room, and he seems much more interested in video game development, but for Des, this completely reframes the context of her room. A single badly traced drawing of a scantily clad dragon woman lay under her bed, hidden away shamefully. A flute and violin lay broken and battered on the floor, discarded in frustration before she found an instrument she enjoyed too much to break. Flyers line the closet doors, for events that may or may not have ever happened. Reminders of failure and lost opportunities. It's not just the room of an irresponsible teenager, but of a girl whose skill cannot live up to her passion and creativity. A girl who is furious because her hands cannot put to paper the picture in her head or make the music she loves to listen to. It is the room of someone well and truly miserable. Without getting too into the weeds of how Des disappeared, as that's its own can of worms, I think this frustration fed into a cycle of anger that eventually came to a head, and caused her to be a part of something that resulted in her no longer being in hometown. With that departure, she was well and truly severed from her dreams. She could not express herself, she couldn't even find joy in her guitar. She left all of that behind in her room, frozen in the moment she left. Those feelings of frustration with no outlet bubbled under the surface and festered into resentment and obsession, until nothing remained of the lost girl except a husk obsessed with escaping into fantasy, the same way she did with her friends and younger sister oh so long ago. With this in mind, I think it's easy to identify the mysterious liquid the night is dripping when we first encounter them in Chapter 3. It's not drool or some mysterious illness-induced leakage. It's tears. Despite their mysterious and ambiguous mission, the night, as Des, still mourns the dreams they have left behind. And as proof of that mourning, proof that those dreams have fallen by the wayside, proof that the night cries, should we defeat the night in that encounter, we are rewarded with a shadow crystal, naturally generated, likely just one of many the night has on their person. Firstly, I'd like to thank you for giving me your time. This is my first real foray into video making of any kind, and my first genuine attempt to share my thoughts and theories on Deltarune, or any game, really. This was more just a collection of thoughts than like a proper theory, but it is sort of setting the framework for some actual theories I plan to discuss later down the line. If you like this video and you're interested in those potential theories, please leave a like and subscribe and all that. It would really mean the world to me. And please do leave a comment regarding your general thoughts, like where exactly you think the shadow crystals came from and so forth. I really do love hearing the perspectives of others when it comes to things like this, and I am super open to having my perspective on these things change. So, again, thank you and have a good one.